And welcome to Beyond the Pod. I am Brandon Mileski from KFAN Radio. Pat Micheletti, my co-host, of course, on Wild Fan Line and Beyond the Pod. And we'll have a guest we'll announce here shortly, which you can see him right now on our KFAN YouTube channel. But Pat, obviously the series is about to start with the Vancouver Canucks, and we're going to be doing a little pregame show Sunday night.
Yeah, I look forward to it, man. When you and I are talking, it's hockey season. So
yes.
We don't converse much, during the off season. So yeah, it's exciting. It's going to be intriguing, interesting. I'm anxious to get it going.
So if you are listening to us on the Beyond the Pod podcast, just letting you know that you can also watch us on the KFAN YouTube channel or our KFAN social media channels. And if you were watching right now, you would notice that there's an athletic hat in our screen, and it's from Michael Russo from The Athletic, who covers. You want one? You want an athletic hat? Michael, before we actually talk about the series between the Wild and Vancouver Canucks, I want to talk to you from a covering it standpoint. I think it's got to be kind of odd to not be in Edmonton, even if you are. You got to do these Zoom interviews. For someone like you that's so great at putting out content that nobody else is, what kind of a challenge is this for you?
First of all, we look great, all three of us. I mean, it's a challenge. I did my first exhibition game on Wednesday. I don't know why all day Wednesday I thought it was Saturday. Even in my original story, I realized that I kept on calling the game. It happened Saturday. I don't know what was going on. I think it's we're at that point in the pandemic.
Yeah.
But it's the first ever game that I've covered where I watched a game on TV and then tried to write it, and I hated every second of it. It's just, there are some, I said this on another podcast today. It's there are some really, really good bloggers in this town, and I don't know how they do it every game. I feel like it's I know it sounds dumb, but I feel like you've got to be in the arena to really get a really good firm grip on and grasp of what happened in the game, why it happened, watch the bench, see the entire ice sheet, not just what's in the frame. And so it made me really nervous about how it's going to go throughout the playoffs, and how I'm going to cover everything. But, I'll get it done, but it's definitely it's definitely a different feeling and atmosphere covering it from watching it on TV than in the arena. And I talked to Anthony LaPanta and Wes Walls today as well, and they had to call the game off the exact picture that we saw on our TV the other night, the other day. And I think that's got to be really tough. They're supposed to have this over. And I talked to another broadcaster from another team today. They have this, what they're calling an all 12 feed that all the broadcasters get. And it's kind of what we see Dick Bramer doing when he watches the game, where he looks up and he's got the whole ball field. Well, this one is apparently just the entire ice sheet from way, way back. And apparently they all look like ants. I talked to LaPanta, and he said that it was absolutely useless. And so he just called the game from what the TV did, what we all saw at home, which has got to be really difficult from a broadcaster to try to recognize players. If you're talking about the Colorado Avalanche the other night, you got 3 left shot 90s. It's very, very tough. I mean, even when you're talking about guys like Fiala and Brodin, who play different positions, but they're left shot guys. They got 20 in their number. They got hair hanging out. It's got to be tough. And then the other thing that's really hard for these broadcasters is they have no control of the replays that they show. So Wes Walls and Ryan Carter the other night were just surprised of whatever came on, and then they had to describe that, where they're not talking to the truck and saying. So that's from their perspective. From my perspective, it was a really helpless feeling, and I just I hope I'm able to write quality content throughout this, because it's also very, very difficult on the Zooms. The NHL runs the Zooms. They mute you immediately after asking a question, which you guys know. When we ask questions at the X, all of us can ask as many questions as we want, multiple questions. The guy whoever in Edmonton was controlling my Zoom, he'd mute me. I'd unmute myself. He'd mute me back. I'd unmute myself and then get a question. It was ridiculous. So, and it's only going to get worse once Vancouver's in the tournament, and we got multiple outlets in Vancouver on these Zooms as well.
Hey, Michael, Brandon and I talked last week about just how good a job the NHL did in their preparation. Probably better than any other league. And you validated that with the piece you did the other day. I mean, talk about that a little bit, and being in the bubble, and all the precautions that the league has taken.
Well, Steve Mayer, who's the executive in charge of this, is just an absolute genius. He really is. He's been one of the biggest gets that the NHL's had in the last 6 or 7 years since he's been with the league. He's the one that's in charge of making all these outdoor games look as incredible as they do. Look what he's done with the NHL awards, and now this. And I'm telling you, we're talking last second. Like, remember, this league was going to Vegas and Vancouver. It was done. It was ridiculous, and then they had to pull out of both, and last second essentially go to Toronto and Edmonton and build what they've built in these bubbles really quick. And I talked to Billy Guerin today, and he said it's just unbelievable what they've done. I talked to Foligno for part 2 of my diaries that I'm doing with him, and he's just like, it's just awesome. I mean, they got the golf simulators in today and things like that. And then what they've done to make these games look well. And in the worst, I mean, look, this is a situation that nobody could have ever envisioned, and the league's just has done an incredible job. And then you see what's going on with baseball right now, and I got to tell you, I mean, it would not shock me if the NHL has to start next season with taking 32 teams and putting them in 4 hubs. Like, could you imagine on December 1st that we're suddenly going to be able to travel and go into arenas and things like that? I don't buy it. And you see what just happened in baseball. I mean, the Phillies just had to cancel their series because one equipment manager got sick, and if traveling and going to arenas is going to be, really unheard of back in December because this pandemic hasn't gone away. They might have to, at a minimum, model for the potential of starting in hub cities.
We're talking with Michael Russo from The Athletic. This is Beyond the Pod. I'm Brandon Mileski, Pat Micheletti with me. Michael, let's talk about yesterday's game on the ice, because we actually got to see something, even though it's an exhibition game. Pretty good speed, I thought, for an exhibition game. Wild lose to the Avalanche by a score of 3-2. Give me one thing that impressed you the most at the Wild, and one thing that worries you the most at the Wild, just based off of yesterday's game.
Goaltending would be to always take the negative first. I mean, Stalock's got to be better if he's starting. I mean, now it's rusty. It's his first game, but he wasn't good, and their power play was worrisome. They had a lot of looks. Their entries weren't very good late in the game. I think, look, their power play was absolutely on fire at the pause. They had, I think, the second best power play in the league from late January on, and from the time that February 4th on, I think it was second best in the league. And so I think that it could get there. But their goaltending, look, they're not going to win the series unless they get great goaltending from whether it's Dubnyk or Stalock. So they've got to do that. And what I liked about it was I thought their forecheck was outstanding when they were effective in that area. Colorado, for large portions of that game, just didn't look either interested or just overwhelmed at times by the Wild forecheck. And Fiala looked absolutely awesome. And so I think that's going to be the biggest thing that I'm going to be looking at in this Vancouver series. If they're going to trade chances with the Canucks, the Wild will lose. If they are going to win this series, they've got to really establish their forecheck, as I know Pat knows, and I think they could get it done. But it's going to start with them spending a lot of time in that offensive zone, sustained pressure, and trying to get mismatches too. Like, to me, if I'm Dean Evison, the third and fourth lines of the Vancouver Canucks are so exposable. And so if you could try to get that Fiala line out against them, if you could try to get that Foligno and Galchenyuk duo out against them, and obviously Parise's line against them, I think it'd be big.
Hey, Michael, there's one guy I think that's really got to be key for Minnesota. And when you're looking at scoring, right? And, we can talk about Vancouver's, the Bessers, Pedersens, JT Millers, Horvat, blah, blah, blah. But after you get past Minnesota's first line, the second line with Ek, Parise, and Luke Kunin. And I bring up Luke Kunin because, I don't think Minnesota's going to outscore somebody 6-5 or, whatever the case may be. But Luke Kunin had a couple chances in tight, and he didn't put them away. And I think when you're looking for a guy that, is in your top six, that's, got to deliver. I think Cunning's got to be one of those guys.
I totally agree with you, and he's been that way all of camp. I mean, and he did it, and it was all last season too. I mean, a lot of posts, a lot of missed opportunities, and you hope that he could become the scorer that he was in college. But this has been his MO so far in his early NHL career, and in a short series like this where there's no room for error, you just got to wonder how much leeway he's going to be given on that line. And God knows I'm not a fan of the way that he's played in Minnesota, and especially last game. But Zuccarello might be a guy that you have to flip and put him on that line. Like, I'd rather Zuccarello try to get the puck to a guy like Parise, and somebody get that puck to him, because Eriksson Ek's not a good enough passer, and Cunning's more of a shooter. So I'd love to see Zuccarello on that line, and I just don't know where he fits on the line with Galchenyuk and Foligno. So maybe you get more of a forechecking line if you throw Cunning on that line with Galchenyuk and Foligno, and you have them create space for Galchenyuk, Foligno and Cunning. So I completely agree with you. Zuccarello's got to be better. Like, again, to me, if he's going to be as bad as he was on the power play the other night, I'd rather Koivu there. At least Koivu knows to get, keep pucks deep and hold the puck on the half wall and all that stuff. And then the other thing, same thing, is like, I know what Dean's trying to do, having Cunning play the bumper position on the power play, but if he's not going to score, you almost rather have a Donato out there or a Greenway in the middle creating havoc or something like that. But that second unit, second unit at the power play for Vancouver is very, very prolific. And especially if Horvat's the one centering that line. So, like, your second power play unit, if you're Minnesota, you need to score if the Fiala unit's not. And to do that, I mean, Zuccarello and Cunning just didn't seem to be working the other night.
I know it is a very cliche, and you're just talking about the Vancouver power play. It's always cliche to go into a series and just say, well, just stay out of the box. But when you look at the 5-on-5 compared to these two teams, and you look at Vancouver's power play, which is fourth in the league, at least 4.5, 5 months ago it was. Is it as simple as just saying stay out of the box in this series?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it'll be interesting with no fans. I just did a big story in The Athletic today on officiating. It'll be interesting to see if it's if the whistles go away like we often see in the playoffs, or if they call it unbelievably tight like they did on the Foligno penalty yesterday, which I didn't think was a penalty that cost them the game. So they've got to stay out of the box. And 5-on-5, the Wild were one of the best teams in the NHL this year. They were really good offensively 5-on-5, which I think a lot of people are surprised by. And so I do think that that's very, very important that the Wild, don't put themselves in a total position where this is, a parade to the penalty box, or if it's going to be, they've got to be the ones to actually put pucks in the net. And it's interesting, the Wild have scored, I think it's 70 power play goals all time against Vancouver. That's their most ever against one team. Well, Vancouver has scored 73 power play goals against Minnesota. That's their most that the Wild have ever given up against a team. So, I mean, obviously what happened in the early 2000s makes no difference now. It's just an interesting tidbit that
it sounds like you're throwing shade at Wes Walz.
Yeah, exactly. Like, you'd think he'd kill a couple penalties back in the day. So,
Right.
by the way, that's just regular season. Like, if you look at the Wild's power play in that 0-3 series, they absolutely demolished the Canucks that series.
Yeah.
Has this has to be, I know it is for me. How is it for you in handicapping this tournament? I mean, in terms of, is it going to be, fewer goals? Is it going to be, what team's going to get tired? What guys are in shape? Who's there in the third period to go that, give you that extra energy, to break up a play? I hate to say it, and I'm going with it, is that it's really anybody's to win.
Oh, yeah.
In my opinion.
No doubt. I mean, I'm not going to go give you the old hockey cliche, whoever gets the best goaltending, but it is going to be fascinating. I mean, this is an interesting series just alone. You got the veteran experience of the Minnesota Wild versus the young kind of up and coming pups in the Vancouver Canucks. But overall in this whole tournament, who the heck knows, right? I mean, everybody's fresh, everybody's healthy. There's no fans in the building. there's going to be a lot of potential dark horses. Like I think that there's, like a team like the New York Islanders is a scary team to me. Like I watched them play yesterday, and they look like they did when they were absolutely on fire last year. They played Barry Trotz hockey. They got a lead, and they couldn't even, no scoring chances against. And they were in such a funk at the break, and now all of a sudden, it's a new season for them. Where conversely, a team like Philadelphia that was absolutely on fire at the break, now who knows what they're going to get. Columbus, demolished by injuries at the break. Here they're completely healthy with the exception of Dubinsky. But they get Seth Jones back, who plays half the game. In this conference, like Vegas has been secretly skating together for several weeks. And nobody's really talking about them. Like, if all of a sudden Fleury, is not very good at the beginning of the series, and now they have Robin Leonard in there. That's pretty freaking good. Yeah. And then another team that nobody's really talking about right now is Winnipeg. Like Winnipeg, if Hellebuck gives them the goaltending that he did during the regular season, they're a formidable challenge for every team. So it's going to be really, really interesting how this all comes about. To get back to the Minnesota series, like I like the Wild a lot in this series if they play the way they're capable of, but they've got to get goaltending, and that's the wild card right now. Like Markstrom, they theoretically have the edge in goal, and if that's going to be the case, the Wild can't win the series. Like they've got to get good goaltending, and you again got to wonder how quick of a hook Dean's going to have with whoever he starts in goal. The best goalie in camp's been Kakinen, and it looks like they're not even considering starting him right now. So,
Michael, I read your story in theathletic.com, and I think it was a transcript of your Straight from the Source podcast with the two Vancouver guys, and I apologize I don't have their names on hand. And I thought one of them made a point that I hadn't even thought of, which was, typically after the regular season's over, you have 3-4 days to study up on your opponent, right?
Yep.
Whereas this time they've known their opponent for a month.
Since late May.
Yeah. So my question for you is, have you had any conversations with Dean Evason or the coaching staff on how much they put into really dissecting Vancouver, because they've had so much more time than you would a typical opponent?
I think that they've done it a lot as a coaching staff. They haven't done it a lot with the Minnesota Wild. They didn't want to give them sensory overload throughout camp. They've really started this week looking at them. But I do feel like both these teams know everything about each other at this point. And Vancouver's got a really good quality coaching staff led by Travis Green. And same thing on Minnesota's end. So they've done a ton of pre-scouting. And it's going to be interesting. The one thing I will say is I'm a little surprised that because of that Dean hasn't come back with different lines than he did in the Anaheim game. You would just think that most likely that he would have scrambled things up here in a really quick series, potentially quick series, and maybe just mixed up and matched the lines a little differently. But it seems like he's pretty much going with the lines. Well, he is going right now with the exact lines that we saw in that final practice on March 11th, heading into what should have been the March 12th game against Vegas.
That I want to talk about that first goal yesterday, and I'll tell you why that the Wild gave up. Maybe not the best rebound that Stalock let. Okay, but Carson Soucy, all right, he kind of, I don't want to call it lazy, but wasn't there to pick up Donskoy, right? Do you think he makes that play if there's a crowd in there with more atmosphere, with more focus?
Well, he that whole play, he was late on it, Pat, because he made a really bad decision in the neutral zone to pinch, and that's why he was late. But he had a bad game yesterday. And remember, he not only did he have the pause like every other NHL player, but he had gotten hurt in Edmonton, coincidentally, in February. So he hasn't played in frankly, 5.5 months. And it looked it. I mean, he made a mistake in all 3 goals. Remember, it was him. I believe it was him in the neutral zone on the McKinnon play too, where Hunt was hung out to dry. And Greenway was really lazy going back to the bench, and Eric Stahl took a bad pinch in the neutral zone, and that was just a colossal mess up by everybody. But then on the 5-on-3 goal, same thing. That was Soucy.
My point kind of is that with the lack of not to pick on Carson for that play, but just for how much of a factor do you think the non-crowd will have on a player's focus, drive,
Yeah.
energy,
Well,
is getting at.
It's funny. I mean, I don't know how much like him being late there had to do with the crowd and everything, but I think it's going to play a factor in this. I mean, it was weird for a lot of these players. I talked to Foligno today, and he told me in warmups yesterday they had Adam Abrams doing. The way it works for home teams. I don't know if I've even written this. Is that all these game ops for every arena has sent them the national anthem, has sent them their opening warm-ups, like the State of Hockey song, all this stuff. So when they're the home team, it's going to sound like a Minnesota Wild home game. Goal horn, all that type of stuff, goal celebration music, all that.
Crowd yelling, shoot.
Yeah, exactly.
We got the crowd yelling, shoot. Okay.
So for the Wild game yesterday, Adam Abrams, now to the ice, the Minnesota Wild and the long Wild. And then the Wild players came out there, and Foligno said that it was so silent that even the players on the ice were skating around, going woo woo, trying to create atmosphere, just sarcastically. So I mean, look, it's going to be bizarre, with no crowd there, and that's kind of the interesting thing, also from a beat writer perspective, not being there, because I'd like to see what it is like. But after that first game that you write that, it's like you can't write it every single game. At some point, you just got to play hockey. So, look, it's one of those intangibles that no doubt is gonna sort of have an effect on all these teams. And that's another thing to get back to your original point about this being so wide open, Pat, is that none of us know how that's going to affect things. If you're a rugged guy like Marcus Foligno, and you go out and try to change a game when you're down 2-0, and you go and you clobber JT Miller, and you got no crowd going nuts to give you that momentum, does that even have an effect in a game?
One guy for Vancouver who would incite the crowd would be Antoine Roussel.
Yeah.
I saw a tweet from a quote from him the other day, basically saying that Vancouver's better in every single part. Every part that compares, they're better than the Wild. I just kind of laugh off quotes like that. I think the best way to they've had experience against him in a playoff series before. I think you just completely ignore him because he's the kind of guy who wants reaction. What did you think of the quote from him, and what kind of role can he maybe play in this series?
Yeah, I mean, if he's the Antoine Roussel that was in Dallas, I mean, he'll be an agitator. But the games since he's left Dallas, he's been almost invisible in all these games against Minnesota. So it's just a question: is he the same player? Is he going to be that guy? Do the refs calm him down and things like that? But he's an absolute agitator. As far as the quote, I same thing. I mean, I retweeted it just to draw some attention. But to me, it's like kind of as you alluded, Brandon, it's like if you need bulletin board material at this point in time, you're not going to win anyway, right? If Antoine Roussel is riling up the Wild locker room, they're doomed to begin with.
They got to win. They're going to play, whoever they think they got to play. Ryan Suter, listen, no one's played in 5 months. Guys get ready during the exhibition season and training camp. You're right into the fire right away. Is he? Do you think Dean will just play him like he normally plays him, or will the minutes be cut back? And how do you foresee that going?
Well, I mean, it's a short series. If they're going to win this series, they're going to need their top four to play a ton, and especially if Soucy and Hunt are going to look like they looked in the exhibition game. So I think that we're going to see a ton of them. He looks great right now. I don't want to make the mistake and have Common clip this and play it about me talking about training camp and how great they were and everything. But man, was he awesome in camp. But look, he and Spurgeon looked great last night. I thought Brodin looked awesome yesterday. But Spurgeon and Brodin were so good yesterday. But Suter, to me, has had a great camp. And that, to me, is – and this is going to sound like I'm slighting Suter, but to me, one of the biggest shocks that I've had of this camp is how good Suter's looked. Because, half the battle with a lot of these veterans that have like 50 kids is wanting to be in this bubble and going on this trip and being away from their families forever. And the teams that have 1 foot back to their home markets are the teams that are going to lose right away. So when Suter, that first scrimmage in Minnesota, was the best player on the ice by a mile, other than Fiala. But like, to me, like that said something. And I think these guys have come in with great attitudes. A lot of these guys that potentially didn't want to be part of this, and again, I mean, for obvious reasons. I mean, it's not just Suter and Parise and Koivu and Stahl. I mean, Alex Stalock's wife's, if the Wild, let's put it this way, if the Wild go to the Cup Finals, they're going to need Dubnyk because Alex Stalock's wife's, due in September, and Marcus Foligno's wife's due, right around the Stanley Cup Final, and so these players have real life concerns outside this bubble, and the fact that Suter and these guys have come in with such great attitudes, and I think I give a lot of credit to Billy Guerin and Dean Evison getting their minds on straight. It says a lot.
All right, 2 more questions, Michael. Let's continue to talk about training camp then. Which one player that will not be on the playoff roster for the opening night, or which 2 players impressed you the most in training camp?
Well, that won't be in the lineup.
Yes.
Kakkonen, definitely. I thought he was great. And that's probably about it. I mean, and that's, again, not slating. It's like Mayhew is Mayhew. Johnson was Johnson. Rao was Rao. Sturm was really good. Sturm is the guy that would probably be in the lineup right away if the Wild suffered an injury, especially up the middle, probably over Victor Rask. And again, if the Wild if they plan to buy him out this summer, you might not want to play Rask and risk injury. Although Rask has this tendency with the Wild, he had 3 or 4 goals this year, and they were all like big ones. Remember the tying goal he had in the last game in Anaheim?
Yeah.
I mean, that was unbelievable. And then on the back end, you know what? I mean, if the Wild suffer an injury on the back end, I mean, to me, Barkowski is a good enough defenseman, and Belpedio and Manel, we'll see. But Kakkonen by far and Sturm would be, the 2 guys I'd answer there.
All right. Well, I get the last question then. Why does Vancouver win, and why does Minnesota win?
Well, Minnesota wins if they forecheck the heck out of this team. I think that if Fiala is the star that we saw down the stretch, that offsets a lot of what Vancouver can do. And in terms of Vancouver wins if their skill outshines the Wild. Like, their 3rd and 4th lines aren't going to beat them. Their blue line is not going to beat them unless it's just Quinn Hughes by himself. But guys like Pettersson, Brock Besser, Bo Horvat, these guys are awesome players. But the one guy that I'm telling you that Wild fans are going to grow to just be like, holy crap, is he better than I ever thought of, is JT Miller. Like, he's an engine, man. I didn't see, in Tampa, he was behind the Stamkoses and the Kucherovs and the Johnsons and the Palats and those guys. And, New York, he was really young. But man, he and Quinn, he was so good in that final game against Minnesota in February that the Wild won out there. He was awesome. But that game was a game that, if I remember correctly, the Wild exposed Quinn Hughes. So, he could be exposed. So their blue line is really beatable. But their top 6 forwards are really, really good. So convoluted answer to you, but look, we've all seen what the Wild have to do to be successful, and it starts with getting the save on the easy chances, which the Wild don't do well enough. They're one of the worst teams in the league at that. And getting the puck out of their own end. Their top 4D easily can do that. But once it's in there, it's watching them grind down low and beat the heck out of their defensemen. And if they hit those defensemen and wear them out and tire them out, the Wild will get their scoring chances in this series.
Michael, I read your stuff at theathletic.com. I follow you at Russo Hockey on Twitter. I follow you on Instagram. I'm Facebook friends with you. I listen to your Straight from the Source podcast. Am I missing any other platforms you're on that you'd like to promote?
No, that's about it. Talknorth.com, though, the Russo Suhan show. That's that we do every week as well. But you're right. If you're not an Athletic subscriber, I'm telling you, now's the time to get in. You can get in for 40% off. I think theathletic.com/KFAN goes for another day or two. And that's 40% off. But again, with sports coming back, it's just now's the perfect time to get in. There's so much hockey coverage. It's just overwhelming how much hockey coverage there is. And so I highly recommend people joining.
If you're a fan of hockey, which I think you are, if you're watching or listening to this podcast, there's no better coverage, not only from the Minnesota Wild for you, but from the National Hockey League. Then, we
have 60 hockey writers. It's crazy. And about 40 of us will be working during the playoffs here.
All right, Michael, really appreciate your time. We'll keep following you.
Yep, see you guys.
All right, Michael Russo from The Athletic. we'll continue a little bit here, Pat, to talk about the Minnesota Wild moving forward here. And I should let everyone know that's listening or watching that we will be doing a pregame show on Sunday night before Game 1 on the Fan. So that'll be at 8:30 from 8:30 to 9:15, I believe.
Okay.
And then on Tuesday for before Game 2, we're going to be on 8 to 9:30. You and I will have to do an hour and a half. So hopefully we'll have lots to talk about after Game 1. But just from yesterday's exhibition game, what are kind of some of the things that stuck out to you?
Well, I was curious to see the pace right off the get-go. And, to no surprise to me, the guys are in shape and the pace was really good. I mean, look at Nathan McKinnon. I thought the Wild were a little loose really to start the game. Really gave up a lot of area on the ice, and in credit Colorado for their speed. But I didn't want to overjudge how it was because it was the first game, and when you haven't played in a while and you're playing against another opponent, and the tempo is increased, it's going to take some time. So I think it was good that the league allowed them to play a game, and now it's time to get ready.
This is the kind of topic that's always dicey to talk about on a podcast because by the time someone listens to it or watches it, we might already have this news in hand. But regarding the goaltending situation, Dean Evison says, he's not going to reveal whether he knows. I think he knows who he's going to go with, and I think it's Alex Stalock. To me, Stalock was going to be the man before we had the pandemic. They did start him yesterday. And to me, given Dubnyk's history with the team, experience over Stalock, if it was one of those where you're really on the fence, I think Dubnyk would have started yesterday. The fact that Stalock started, I think it was going to take a horrendous performance from Stalock yesterday to not play him in Game 1. I think he's the obvious choice.
I do too. And, you play a different style when Alex is in the net than when Devin is in the net. I still think the bottom line is that they've got to give the goalie a chance to make that first save. And if they do that and Alex or Devin, whoever it is, probably Alex, makes that first save, that I think that's going to be the key. And, they've got to buckle down in their own end and protect their goalie because, let's face it, nothing against either of these goalies, but they're not in the top 10 of top 15, maybe, of some of the goaltenders that are in this playoff. So it's going to be key that they get back defensively and help take care of who's ever in the net on Sunday.
It's always a mistake to take one little play from an exhibition game and extrapolate it. But you and I on this podcast last week talked about, which guys maybe, are going to benefit from having this 4 to 5 month break mentally. And one of the guys I mentioned was Matt Dumba. He did not have a very good season, and kind of having just to clear the mind a little bit and maybe get back to having that offensive swagger that he once had. One power play shot, but that being said, that's his bread and butter. He blasted it past Grubauer, and to me, I thought that was a significant moment for Matt Dumba, and hopefully gets that offensive confidence here moving forward.
Well, you and I always talk about how key specialty teams are, your penalty kill and your power play. And it could be even more important in this playoffs, just based on everything we've seen and known thus far. So to have Matt Dumba come back and just for his confidence too, right? He didn't miss the net. It didn't go over the net. He didn't hit the pipe. He put it in the back of the net. And when you score a goal, I know, Brandon, you were a stay-at-home D, but
I had to be.
Yeah, but you feel
that wasn't by choice.
No, okay, but it feels really good, and it's like, yeah, I can do this. I want to do it again and again. And if he gets that confidence going, he is going to be a really, really important piece to the Wild power play in the playoffs.
Well, I think it could be kind of an X factor. When people are previewing the two teams in the series, you always hear it's like they always match up first line against first line, and top six against top six, and bottom six against bottom six, and goalie versus goalie. And that's fine, but Pat, when you're out on the ice, scoring is not just the three forwards in front. Yes, it's more important, But those blue liners, especially for the Minnesota Wild, can help out offensively. So while we might not have the top 6 Vancouver has, which by the way, I don't think we're as far off as based on the way Fiala was playing before this break. Our first line can play with their first line as long as we got that Fiala. Okay, so I don't think it's as big of a mismatch as some people think. But that being said, from a 5-man unit standpoint, I like the Wild's ability to get offense from their blue line more so than Vancouver, even though they got Quinn. And Dumba being able to produce would just add to that.
Oh, without a doubt. Now let me ask you, what's your biggest concern for the Wild going into this series?
Well, I know we're here trying to preview what's going to happen in this series, and we're going to be doing the same thing Sunday night. Pat, let's face it, none of us know what's going to happen here. The teams we saw back in January, February, and early March is not necessarily going to be. I know they're the same players, right? It's not like the season has changed and you brought in some free agents and you had some trades. But while the players are the same, it's still, just the Mikko Koivu you saw in February might not be the Mikko Koivu you're going to see now. And Russo was talking about Zuccarello. He might not be the same Zuccarello. We were just talking about Dumba, how we think he can be better. So I think it's virtually impossible to predict. But, clearly the biggest thing that has handicapped this Wild team throughout the season, because defensively they've been elite. Yep. Offensively, they've produced enough.
At the end,
it's been the goaltending. So even if we hadn't had this 5-minute break, this 5-month break, I would have been like, I don't know what goaltending we're going to get, and it's even more so now.
Right? Yeah, I agree. And again, for the 9,000th time, this is why these playoffs intrigue me so much, because we don't know anything about any of the teams, what they're going to bring out, who's going to be available or not available to play, and what guys are ready. The third period for me, I'm going to really watch closely to see, especially if it's a tight game, and how much guys have left in the tank, because you get to the point where if your legs start to go, your mind, if you get tired, your mind starts to go a little bit, and who's not going to make that mistake? That's what I'm looking forward to watching.
Yeah, I know they had an exhibition game and they've had inter-squad scrimmages, but the legs will be heavy third period of game one. They will be. So probably important the Wild have a lead going into that third period on Sunday night. One topic, non-Minnesota Wild, before we go here. Last week we talked about the University of St. Thomas officially moving up to D1. Now we find out that they are the 8th member of the CCHA, and it makes a ton of sense to me. They had 7 members. Regionally, you've got Mankato and Bemidji here in the state, and Michigan and Ohio not too far away. Makes sense to have the my Tommies go to the CCHA.
Yeah, I'm going to adopt them because I am thrilled.
No, they're mine.
They're yours. Okay, but I'm right below you there.
Yeah.
But no, you and I have been talking about this, I don't know for how long, that it's time that they move up. And I think it's going to be terrific for everybody in the state of Minnesota, for the teams that are now here. Now we'll have 6 for the other 5 teams, and to get them on their schedule. And I just think, I think it's wonderful, and we're growing the game. And I think that program is going to be great from the get-go.
All right. On the other side of this, Pat, and I know you have college hockey sources more so than I do.
Mm-hmm.
What's going to happen with the WCHA? What's going to happen to Alabama? What's going to happen to the 2 Alaska teams after the season is done?
Well, you know what I think is going to happen. I think you're gonna see some changes in some of the teams in respective leagues. It would not shock me to see Western Michigan and Miami of Ohio leave the NCHC and kind of get traded for Minnesota State and Bemidji to go to the NCHC. I've been hearing rumors about that it's in the works. So
explain this to me. So Bemidji and Mankato would now leave the CCHA and move to the NCHC.
Yes.
And Miami of Ohio and Western Michigan would then go to the WCHA or the CCHA?
They would go to, well, there's no WCHA anymore, remember?
Well, okay, so that's what I was asking about. Yeah. So that league is just disbanding.
go to the CCHA.
Okay, got it.
And it only makes sense because of, the travel concerns. Listen, Western Michigan has already dropped 8 sports. And so from, purely for financial reasons. And listen, I've talked to coaches at Western. I've talked to coaches at Miami for the past couple of years. They love playing in the NCHC. Don't get me wrong. However, you know what? It's pretty easy to get on a bus to go from Miami of Ohio to Bowling Green rather than get on a plane and fly to Duluth or St. Cloud or North Dakota or whatever. And that's a cost saving thing. And also their rivalries are back there, and so I would foresee that happening. I don't know the fate of Alabama Huntsville. They're safe for another year. Unless they can find a league to play in, because they will not be part of the new CCHA. If they're accepted into the Atlantic or another league is formed, because you got Arizona State out there too, still an independent, still without a league. They're going to have to come to some conclusion to where they're going to be soon. So I think we're going to see some changes. Nothing firm, but that's what I'm hearing.
All right, Pat, you and I will break down the Wild Vancouver Canucks game 1. We will break it down in depth Sunday night at 8:30 on the Fan and on the iHeartRadio app. And I appreciate your time as always.
Yep, you too, Brandon. Look forward to seeing you Sunday.
All right, he's Pat Micheletti. I'm Brandon Mileski. This has been yet another episode of Beyond the Pod. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll talk to you next week.